So welcome to everyone who's joining us. We're so glad you're here. As we are just kind of give a minute or two for people to connect, you can go ahead and put in the chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to know where folks are from.
That's gonna blow up the chat.
That's all right. That's great. Welcome. Yeah, feel free to put in your locations there. We've got a good time of day for this webinar to reach people around the globe. So we're excited to have a really international audience.
Oh, this is very international.
Yeah, it's great. New Rochelle in my neck of the woods. That's wonderful.
From India too. Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder what time it is there.
Yeah, so we've got London, Finland, Cleveland, East Lansing, Michigan, Santiago, Chile.
That's all right. I saw Scotland.
Hi,
Italy,
Steve.
yeah.
Steve Kurtz is saying hi. Lisbon from our last in-person SEPI meeting. Feels like a long time ago. San Juan, Puerto Rico, Canada, California. Someone asked if I could read out some of the names. I think probably joining us from the phone.
Did you say?
Oh, Istanbul, 6:30 at night. Thanks for joining us this evening. All right. So feel free to keep those locations coming. We'd love to see where y'all are from. I'm Tracy Proud. I'm the chair of the Communications and Publications Committee of SEPI, and I will be moderating today. So I'll give you a few little opening instructions. We're using the chat right now just to put in where people are joining us from. When you have questions during the webinar, you can post those in the Q&A section. We're going to hold most questions until the end after Chris and Catherine are done presenting. And I'll kind of chime in with those questions and we'll try and respond to you in the Q&A as we're going along, just to let you know that I've seen your question. We do have another webinar scheduled. Shigeru is going to tell you about that in just a minute. And we are so thankful for Dr. Catherine Eubanks and Dr. Chris Moran for joining us today to talk about Therapeutic Alliance and the Alliance model. I'm going to turn it over to Shigeru. If you have any technical issues, you can chat just directly to me. You know, I can't hear, can't see, something's going wrong. Feel free to send me a private message in the chat. And again, any questions for the presenters, you can put in the Q&A. All right, I'll turn it over to Shigeru.
Hi, this is Shigeru Iwakabe, and I'm the past president of SEPI. And as you know, welcome to SEPI webinar series. As many of you know, SEPI is an international organization promoting integration of various psychotherapy models and also integration of research and practice. And we really also explore this open communication and dialogue between researchers and clinicians, clinicians of various orientations. And in this, we started this webinar series to really connect in the midst of COVID. And we also wanted to really really show you the innovative ideas and concepts and way of practice which are related to psychotherapy integration. And today we have a very exciting webinar by Dr. Chris Moran and Dr. Catherine Eubanks. Both are very important and central members of SEPI for many years. And Alliance Rupture is probably one of the most innovative and clinically useful and truly integrative in the sense that it's based on the research and it's very clinically relevant, useful ideas. So we are very happy to present this webinar. And before, I mean, many of you know two of them, but I just wanted to say that they just released a book called Therapist Performance Under Pressure, Negotiating Emotion Difference Rupture from APA. And they also have a demonstration DVD that came out with a book. And they also have a very great, very interesting special issue in Journal of Clinical Psychology in session on alliance rupture. So I hope that after this session, you will be visiting the journal site and APA site and check out the book and also the special issue. And just the last thing before I move on and pass the baton to them, there is another webinar in May. It's entitled Advancing Psychotherapy Integration by Creating Common Grounds, presented by Marv Goldfried, Jeffrey Smith, Greg Henriquez, and led by Michael Moscolo. The information is on SEPI website, which is renovated and looks great. And thanks to Tracy.
And Catherine.
And Catherine, that's right. So I'm gonna pass the baton to Chris and Catherine.
And I'm just gonna jump in with one more thing. I put the link to the next webinar in the chat. And Steve Kurtz pointed out that there is not a way to private message me on the chat. So if you have a tech issue, just put it in the chat and I'll see it. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Greetings from New York. Thank you, Shigeru and Tracy, for inviting us. Happy to welcome everyone to this webinar and hope all are safe during these challenging times. Today we'll be presenting on definitions and principles derived from our research program, which has been in play at Mount Sinai Beth Israel since 1990 with support from NIMH, our National Institute of Mental Health. Our work has also been supported by APA Books and Videos, Guilford Press, and Taylor and Francis, in addition to our respective academic affiliations. We're going to begin today with a couple video demos to set up an important theme that we'll be developing throughout this webinar. And for that, let me pass the baton to my principal colleague, Catherine Eubanks.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm going to show you all a very brief clip. And what we're interested in is how, sort of what feelings this brings up for you watching the clip, imagining being the therapist with this patient. And so I'm going to show you the clip, and then you'll have a chance to kind of share with us your reactions. It's very brief. Here we go.
Does that make sense to you? Maybe.
Okay, so now we're going to have a brief poll where you can share, just one of these options, what gets closest to your reaction when seeing this brief clip.
This is fun.
And Catherine, people are saying that the sound was really low. Are you able to give it more time for folks?
Sure. Let's play it one more time.
Does that make sense to you? Maybe.
So the therapist said, "Does that make sense to you?" And the patient said, "Maybe."
On the next one, Catherine,
okay,
check the volume on the screen. Make sure it's at max.
I will. So it looks like, so I don't know, Tracy, can they see the poll responses from the whole group? Probably not till we end the poll.
I'm going to end the polling now. And I'm going to share the results.
Okay, so it looks like cautious got the most votes and followed by confused and neutral. So you can see, but one important thing is that there's a lot of different reactions. So we may all have different reactions to what we're seeing. Okay, we're gonna do this one more time with a different clip.
Does that make sense to you?
Maybe.
Oh wait, sorry, that was the same one. I can't tell where I'm at. Okay.
And Catherine, you might want to, in your share screen, there's a little arrow to the right of the share screen where you can say share computer sound.
I did that. It's
Okay.
clicked. Yeah, this
Okay.
is, sorry, it's just not very loud.
Okay.
So
lean
here's,
close to your computer.
yeah, so I'll play this one twice as well.
Does that make sense to you?
Does that make sense to you?
Here it is again.
Does that make sense to you?
Does that make sense to you?
Okay, so the therapist said, does that make sense to you? And the patient said, does that make sense to you? So let's do another poll and see how people react to that clip.
I think it's.
Hang on, it's coming.
Okay, thanks, Tracy.
I'll just give people a little more time to weigh in.
And just let me know when you want me to share the results.
I think let's wrap it up now. Okay, so this time, annoyed was the top choice, followed by cautious and anxious. So we'll come back later in the presentation to why paying attention to these reactions is so important. Okay, so what our learning objectives, what we're sort of hoping you'll take away from our talk today is why we think it's important to focus on the alliance and sort of how we're conceptualizing the alliance, what alliance ruptures are and how therapists can detect them, and then what therapists can do to repair ruptures and to further develop our rupture repair abilities. So Chris.
Okay, so let me start by talking about why we have focused on the alliance. Now, our focus was founded a few decades ago on our interest to redress treatment failures in psychotherapy, which are quite sobering based on various meta-analyses and reviews. Here you can see some stats on treatment non-response and premature termination, for example. These have motivated us to try to figure out a way to do better. And in this regard, we decided to focus on the alliance because of the extensive research already at the time demonstrating its predictive value and its promise as a critical change process. And the research has shown that poor alliance predicts treatment failure, and that some therapists are worse than others with regard to establishing alliance as well as outcome. There's also now a good deal of research regarding the prevalence and predictive validity of rupture and repair. And these stats here are based on patient report. All this encouraged us to try to develop therapist abilities to recognize and resolve ruptures. Next slide. Before introducing our efforts in this regard, let me address how we define the alliance. The alliance construct, as many of you know, began as an analytic formulation to account for the real and practical aspects of the therapeutic relationship before being recognized and applied as an integrative variable or common factor. The definition that contributed most to this evolution and that we found most organizing is Borden's reformulation, according to which the alliance is comprised of purposeful collaboration, that is agreement between therapist and patient on the tasks and goals of treatment, and the affective bond, or the mutual trust and respect that, that patients and therapists feel towards each other. Accordingly, ruptures can be understood as disagreements or deteriorations, and repair as reestablishing agreement, understanding, and trust. We appreciated this reformulation with its emphasis on mutuality because it allowed for an elaboration whereby at the implicit level, alliance could also be understood as a negotiation between patient and therapist subjectivities, between their respective needs and desires. Accordingly, rupture could be understood as tension between these respective needs or desires, and repair as a movement towards mutual recognition, recognition of each other's subjectivities, a new relational or corrective emotional experience. So for us, the Borden's formulation, which was trans-theoretical and integrative in nature, really accounts for what happens at the explicit level, but because of its formulation on mutuality, it allowed for a relational understanding of existential motivations that operate at the implicit level. So let me say a little bit more about this, especially with regard to rupture. Go to the next slide. So what do we mean by intersubjective negotiation? This is really getting at the heart of what we mean by rupture. So for us, rupture involves an inherent tension in negotiating a coupled dialectics. The first has to do with agency and communion and the needs and the pursuit of those needs. And that all humans struggle to negotiate. So the need for self-definition and the need for relatedness. This is an ongoing challenge for both patient and therapist in their relationship, and invariably results in tensions. We'll say more about this when we get more specific about what we mean by rupture. The other dialectic is the recognition that our first moves in any interpersonal encounter invariably involves objectification of the other. We always initially fit others into pre-existing categories. And these are based on past experiences, on heuristics, implicit biases, and social constructions. These are efforts to exert control over ambiguity. It is always an effort or struggle to see the other as a unique subject. In other words, to subjectify the other. There are always inherent tensions in the negotiation of these dialectics, and these are fundamental to understanding of rupture. Now we're going to get more specific about what we mean by rupture. Catherine?
Okay, so how to operationally define a rupture. So we think about this in basically broadly two ways. So one, you can be paying attention to interpersonal behaviors, looking at the behaviors of the patient and the therapist, and see these as kind of markers that a rupture may be occurring. And we'll talk about identifying examples of sort of two broad categories of rupture: withdrawal rupture and confrontation rupture. The other piece is paying attention intrapersonally to what the therapist is experiencing. The therapist's own emotional reaction to what's happening can be a really valuable clue that something's going on. And throughout all of this, we want to underscore that we really see this as a dyadic process. So even though sometimes the research focuses maybe more on one person's behavior than another, that we really see this as both patient and therapist are co-constructing whatever's going on. Both are contributing to the rupture process in some way. It's not necessarily a 50-50 split, but both are a part of what's happening. And it's important to be paying attention to that. So first, I'm going to talk some about thinking about identifying alliance ruptures in terms of interpersonal behaviors. And I'm going to start with the patient's behavior, and then I'll talk about the therapist's behavior. So I'm not trying, I don't want to give the impression that it's just like patients who cause ruptures or contribute to ruptures. So we've found it really helpful to think about this in terms of withdrawal and confrontation. Withdrawal being movements away from the other, movements away from your own experience, movements away from the work of therapy. This can be thought of as efforts either to isolate yourself or to appease the other person, but in a way that's moving away from what you're really experiencing in the moment. And you can also think about this as kind of privileging communion, maintaining some kind of connection with the other person at the expense of agency, at the expense of really being direct or straightforward about how, if you're sort of dissatisfied or upset about what's going on. And this can look like things like going silent, giving a very short, minimal response to an open-ended question, denying something that's quite evidently happening, a split between the content of what you're saying and the affect with which you're saying it, like smiling while talking about something upsetting to kind of distance from the upsetting thing, changing the topic to get away from something, telling stories in an effort to get away from something, talking in a very abstract, intellectualized way, or being overly protective or accommodating. And one thing you'll see is with these examples is some of these things can be very subtle. So when we use the word rupture, even though it sounds like this big dramatic moment, we're not just talking about big dramatic moments, but also these tiny little moves, tiny little misattunements that can be part of a rupture process. With confrontation, it's movements against the other or against the work of therapy. This can include efforts towards aggression or control of the other person, or pursuing agency at the expense of communion. And this could look like complaints about the therapist, suggesting the therapist is incompetent, complaining about the treatment tasks, complaining about a lack of progress in treatment. This could include microaggressions against the therapist's cultural identity, or coercions, like being overly friendly or seductive. We can also see these versions of these things on the therapist side. So the therapist can also be the one moving away or moving against. And this could also look like therapist goes silent and finds, they're feeling confused, their mind's wandering, they're kind of moving away from the work of therapy. They're the ones shifting the topic or trying to avoid something. Talking too much or using too much psychobabble that functions to get away from the work of therapy, or being overly protective or accommodating. Therapist confrontation markers could include pathologizing the patient excessively, blaming and belittling them, trying to force the patient to sort of fit your theory, or showing empathic failure, therapist microaggressions against the patient's cultural identity, or having difficulty navigating the right balance between mutuality and asymmetry, either avoiding kind of taking it, sort of acknowledging and grappling with the power differential that the therapist has, or being overtly dominating or domineering. So those were sort of the interpersonal behaviors we can observe. And then there's also the intrapersonal markers we can observe in ourselves and our emotional reactions to what's going on. So these could include basic emotions when we feel anxious or angry or sad. Also self-conscious emotions when we feel embarrassed or guilty or prideful. And what we're saying is these could be clues of ruptures happening. I mean, they could be other things as well, but if this is happening, like one question we should be asking ourselves is there some kind of rupture process taking place? And then other emotions as well. Feeling bored could be a sign of a disconnection and a movement away from the other person. Feeling emotions like love or seduction, misempathy, and over-identification could all be things that could be kind of signals that perhaps we're in the midst of some sort of rupture process.
Okay, so the first two clips that we played and the polling exercise that we invited you to participate in really was aimed to try to orient you to your internal experience, to your emotional experience, and try to develop this theme of the therapist's emotional experience as a compass to what's going on in the therapeutic alliance. Now I want to make that even more evident with an awareness exercise. Okay, so take a moment to allow your body to settle into a comfortable position. Close your eyes and sit straight up with your arms and legs crossed. Take 3 full breaths with a long breathe out. We will begin with a brief body scan, checking in with our bodies and trying to notice what physiological sensations and emotions might be present. Begin by bringing awareness to the top of your body, your head, scalp, and face. Observe any sensations occurring there. Now move your attention to your neck and shoulders. Notice any movements, any places of holding. Now moving down to the arms and hands. Sensing the back of your body, then the front of your body. Now sense yourself seated, feeling the contact of your body with the seat of your chair. Now attend to your upper legs, your lower legs, and your feet. Are there any particular places that call out for attention? Any places where sensations stand out? Now I'm going to ask you to turn your attention to a recent memory. I want you to imagine a recent encounter with a patient, partner, or friend that was upsetting. Something that made you very anxious or nervous, frustrated or angry, disappointed or sad. In your mind, try to relive the details of the encounter. What was said, what was done. Now pay attention to your body again. Notice how your body felt this experience. Any salient sensations, any holding, any tightness anywhere. Finish with a full deep breath and a long breathe out. We hope this exercise gives you some of an understanding of how our bodies experience and mark emotions. Catherine, can I have the next slide? So what we've just demonstrated thus far is that we can detect ruptures by what we can see in the form of interpersonal markers, whether in the behavior of the patient or in our own behavior, and what can be felt, what the therapists are feeling. Next slide. Despite these various ways of marking, as noted before, ruptures should, though, be understood as a dyadic process. And here are some relational formulations, many that will be familiar to you, to clarify what I mean. And some of these are empirically supported. These have been fundamental to our understanding. This is not an exhaustive list, though. So ruptures can be understood as empathic failures. And by this, I'm referring to dissociative disconnections, experiential avoidance, which is consistent with the ACT language, or self-splits, which is consistent with the EFT language. Ruptures can involve mismatches, misattunements, or miscoordinations. And here I'm referring to the parent-infant research from Ed Tronick, which really demonstrated that the majority of interactions involve misattunements, but that the critical interaction is the repair, the reconnection, the reattunement. Ruptures can also be understood as interpersonal pulls or transformations. And here I'm drawing on the interpersonal literature, and especially on the circumplex research literature. So namely that all behaviors exert a pull on the other. Ruptures can involve vicious circles or enactments, and here I'm drawing on contemporary relational ideas, but also including Paul Wachtel's integrative thinking, where he integrates relational thought with behavioral notions like feedback loops. And finally, ruptures can be understood as power plays. And this refers to the, excuse me, object-subject dialectic I previously mentioned, versus the biases and constructions used to objectify the other, which include power differentials based on gender, race, ethnicity, and other cultural identities. So now we're going to turn to talking about how to repair a rupture. Catherine?
Yes. So this is a representation of some different ways of thinking about repair. There's many different ways to repair. So you can see in this figure, starting with acknowledging a rupture, and all of these pathways are working toward a new relational experience. And that's an important idea in rupture repair, that repairing a rupture can provide a new relational experience or a corrective emotional experience for the patient, especially which could be really impactful, especially if they've had difficulties in interpersonal relationships in the past. To be able to repair a rupture with another person could be really important. So the top path you can see is clarifying, understanding, or validating feelings. These are just the kind of good alliance building, alliance maintaining behaviors that therapists are probably doing a lot of the time. And sometimes you just need to keep doing that, just sort of clarifying what the patient's concern is about, and validating their experience may be sufficient in some cases. The middle path is renegotiating tasks or goals. So it may be that a patient is having an issue with a particular task you're trying to do in the session, or with the goal you're working toward. And what will be helpful is for the therapist to be open to renegotiating that and considering changing or adapting it to better fit the patient's needs. And then the bottom area is exploring the rupture experience, which has been the focus of a lot of our research, but we wanted to make clear that it's not the only way to repair a rupture. And we've also talked, sort of used the language of thinking about this in terms of immediate repair attempts, which just kind of try to address what's happening and then get back on track, get back to whatever the therapist and the patient were working on before. And then more, this bottom path being a more expressive route, where it's more about exploring the patient and the therapist's experience of what's happening. So to make this a little more concrete, some things that could be happening at the level of acknowledging the rupture, the therapist, this could happen at just an implicit level or also at an explicit level. So the therapist would need to, at some level, realize that a rupture is taking place. They might choose to verbalize that explicitly, or they might not. If they're going the route of clarifying understanding or validating feelings, they might clarify if there's been a misunderstanding between themselves and the patient, clarify what is the task they're working on, or the goal, or the rationale for that task or goal. There may be some confusion about it, and that may be the source of the rupture. They can also validate the patient's concern about the task or the goal. And then renegotiating could take the form of further exploring those concerns, or exploring the possibility of changing a task, and then hopefully reaching some kind of agreement, either agreeing to do the original task or agreeing to do some alternative tasks that the patient and therapist have come up with. Those are some of the immediate repair examples. Then the more kind of expressive exploratory would be the patient and therapist exploring their mutual experience of the rupture, the therapist accepting their contribution to the rupture. So again, our idea that the therapist is somehow in some way contributing to what's happening, and it can be really powerful and beneficial for the therapist to name that. It is good modeling for the patient. It helps the patient not feel attacked. It helps create an atmosphere of openness and curiosity rather than blame. And the therapist and patient can explore links to other relational events. So maybe this thing that happened between us is similar to that thing that happens between you and your partner, parents, boss, someone else. But what would be important in sort of deciding where to go with this is to realize that talking about these things can be really difficult, and both patients and therapists may be tempted to avoid or move away from a challenging conversation. So if that starts to happen, the therapist should notice it and try to explore it, explore the avoidance, and redirect back to the discussion of the rupture. And this could be, the therapists themselves could be pulled to avoid, as well as the patient. So it's something to be sort of attentive to. So we wanted to give some examples of, one example of kind of a more renegotiation strategy, and then an example of a more expressive strategy. So we're going to show some clips from the APA video that Shigeru mentioned earlier. And so you'll see a clip of one of us with a patient, and then both of us discussing what just transpired.
So how are you doing today?
Good, thanks.
Okay. What should we focus on?
There hasn't really been a change from last week, so
Okay.
I guess just overall anxiety.
Okay. I wanted to check in. We talked last time about keeping a journal as a way to maybe start getting a sense of what could be going on with the anxiety. How did that go?
It was fine, I guess.
Okay. Can you say, so I'm getting the sense maybe, well, so I'm not clear, like, did you try it and it wasn't helpful? Did you not try it? Sort of what's going on?
You said to write down my feelings.
Yeah.
And I did it for a few days. Basically wrote the same feelings every day. Anxious.
Okay.
I just don't know how that helps.
Okay. And I mean, last time when we talked about it, we talked some about why I was suggesting you do this, the research showing that kind of, you know, putting in words to your feelings and better understanding what contributes to them can be helpful. But it sounds like you weren't finding it helpful to try to do that.
I mean, I did what you said. I wrote down my feelings. I don't feel like I got much out of it. I don't
Mhm.
feel like I learned anything that I didn't know. So
Okay.
it
Okay.
was fine, I guess.
Okay. Can you say more about sort of what exactly you were writing and when you were writing it, so I just get a sense of what the experience was like for you?
Yeah, I did it every morning.
Okay.
Just kind of get it out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote down how I felt then or the day before, and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of felt like I was writing the same thing every time.
Okay.
I mean, I generally feel anxious, and I just
Yeah.
wrote that every day. So
And did you notice? So I know you're writing your feelings, but like also the feelings coming up in the process of writing about it, or in the process of seeing what you're writing. I don't know if can you.
not
anything
really.
about
I kind of racked my brain to think, how did I feel yesterday? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I experienced the feelings as I was writing the journal.
Okay. Did you experience any feelings as you were writing?
Frustration.
Okay.
It's just sort of
Okay.
a tedious task, and
Yeah.
again, didn't seem that useful. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I found myself kind of rolling my eyes and being annoyed that I had to do it.
Okay. Okay. And how did you feel about the fact that I asked you to do that?
I mean, you're the expert, so I thought I would give it a shot.
Yeah.
It seemed sort of like the kind of thing you read about in a generic self-help book. Keep a journal. Great. So I don't know. It didn't seem like it was going to help, but I tried it.
Okay. So even going into it, like when we talked about it last week and I suggested it, even at that point you were
Yeah, I mean,
skeptical?
I'm not really a writer. It's not
Okay.
kind of how I express my feelings. So
Yeah.
I thought I'd try it, but
Yeah.
not really my style.
Well, how do you express your feelings? Is there something else that would be more your style?
Well, it's kind of why I'm here. I struggle to connect with people, and I don't feel like I have somebody I can talk to, so I don't have an outlet to express frustration or negative feelings that I have. I mean, I can talk to my mom a little bit, but she's not that close by, and she doesn't even know half of the people that are involved in my life, so it's just sort of a lonely place to be.
Yeah. I hear that. But I'm intrigued. It sounds like you are able to verbalize your feelings to your mom.
A little bit. I
A
mean,
little bit.
We have a semi-close relationship, but I don't tell her everything I'm feeling.
Right.
I mean, I don't feel like I can open up to her about everything, and I don't really want to burden her with the negative things that I feel on a regular basis. So it's not perfect.
So I'm wondering, and I appreciate that, it really speaks to your effort that even though this didn't feel like a good fit for you, that you still stuck with it for a week. So I appreciate that. And I'm wondering if we could maybe try doing something, like give it sort of one more try, but maybe try modifying it, or try, I don't know, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
What kind of modifications would help?
Well, I guess I'm trying to get a sense of, if I had a better sense of what's the piece of it that's the hardest for you?
I guess figuring out what feelings to write down that would mean something to you.
Oh, that would mean something to me. Can you say more about that?
Well, I mean, I feel sort of the same negative feelings every day. Sort of this general anxiousness and just a reluctance to go out and socialize, and just a concern about how other people perceive me. And so it's just sort of a constant. It's not like it's changing day to day.
Yeah.
So I can list that every single day in my journal, but I don't know how that helps. And I don't know what kind of words you're looking for to say, oh, that's how I can help her, or
Okay.
I don't.
So trying to find a way to communicate better to me what's
Well,
going
the
on.
journal's for you, right?
Well, that's a good question. I can appreciate it might feel that way because I asked you to do it, and it does sort of give me data in a sense, but it's also, my hope is that could also be helpful for you, that the act of doing it can kind of help you be more aware of what's going on for you in a way that itself can help you with regulating your anxiety. But it sounds like doing it this past week, it didn't achieve that goal.
Not so far.
Okay. So I'm wondering, so every day you were writing down your feelings every day, and it was like the same feelings every day. So I'm wondering if we maybe adjusted it, like, were there different things contributing to your feelings each day? Sort of different antecedents to those feelings each day?
Yeah, I mean, every day is a little different. I do slightly different things, so I'm sure there are slightly different things that contribute.
Yeah.
Every
So I'm
time.
wondering, like, what if we build some of that in, sort of some of the events that contributed to how you were feeling?
Yeah, you think that would make a difference?
Well, I think part of what we're trying to do is not just help you be aware of what you're feeling, but sort of the things that contribute to it, and then the effect that it has on you. And so maybe,
I see. And then I should just not do those things that.
well, let's start by just trying to get a sense of what those things are, and kind of be curious about that together,
Okay.
and look for patterns.
Okay. Yeah, I could try that.
And I guess I also want to add, like, the idea is not that it'll immediately change. It's more like we're trying to understand it some more.
So it's fine if I say the same thing every single day in the journal?
Then we learn something from that.
Do we?
We can. I know you're still having some reservations about it.
Yeah, I sort of figured if it's the same every day, then you're not getting much information out of that. And I already know how I feel every day. So.
Right. But let's see, because you mentioned the events can be a little different.
Yeah.
So
like
what
I
if-
might go out one night or something and then
Yeah.
out the next night or something.
Yeah. So let's track that. What are the events and the feelings? And let's see if there are any patterns there with different events and how they impact the feelings for this
Yeah.
week. Does that,
Yeah, I could try that.
how was this for you, this conversation we just had about this?
I think it's helpful because I think you understand why I didn't really get much out of the journal this past week. So yeah, maybe I can kind of explain to you what I did each day in the journal, and maybe we'll get more out of that.
Yeah, and my hope is maybe both of us will get more out of that. Yeah, but
Yeah.
let's try it and let's see how it goes this week.
Okay.
Okay, I appreciate you doing that because I know it's not easy.
Sure.
Well, Catherine, what was your experience of that?
So this one was particularly challenging, and part of that was what we were trying to do. So we wanted to have one demonstration that explicitly demonstrated renegotiating the task.
Right.
So I had a task.
Right. That was your-
Renegotiating the task. And so that meant there were definitely points where I otherwise, if I weren't trying to illustrate that specific
Right.
strategy, I would have wanted to explore
Right,
more,
right.
kind of pursue some of the ways she was dismissing me at points or suggesting I was imposing things on her. I'd want to explore that more, but I tried to focus on the task, tried to invite her to collaborate with me on that. Not entirely successful. That felt like
Right,
pulling teeth
right.
at times.
Right.
Tried to reiterate the rationale for what we were doing, tried to validate her concerns about what we were doing, tried to encourage her to be more curious about her experience, and sort of check in with her about how that was going. Tried to really understand as much as I could the details of her issue with the task,
right.
because there could be a lot of things going on. So one example, when she brought up that writing wasn't her thing, then I started, well, is there something just about writing? Like if we modified the task to orally describe your feelings or something else. I was trying to sort of think about those possibilities. And then in the end, we did come up with something that she at least agreed to maybe try.
Right.
But I'm sure she was still skeptical, so there's still going to be more work to be done.
Right. Well, let me add to it. I mean, first and foremost, I think what shouldn't be underestimated was your non-defensiveness, your openness, your curiosity, which sometimes in and of itself carries the day. That was huge. I am grateful that you did the renegotiation task. It's something we both know is important and should also not be underestimated in trying to understand potential resolution pathways. Something that I think a lot of therapists do. I know, we both do it based on our discussions. There's not as much research on that, but I think we both agreed it was important to demonstrate it. And the other thing I would say about it is that it's not an either or thing, right? So you combine that renegotiation of the task with being exploratory. So I think that's important for clinicians to think about. It's not one or the other necessarily. You're struggling, you're trying to meet the patient in some way. You're trying to meet their needs with your needs, and that includes like what you think you're capable of doing. And that's at the heart of ruptures, like how you're going to negotiate those needs, which goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Let me ask you one last question, which has to do with this notion of new relational experience, and I have some thoughts about it, but I want to tee you up on that and your thoughts about how that applies here.
So I don't want to assume that that's what she came away with, but
Right.
There's the hope that if she's used to, for example, if she's used to not sharing her feelings with others because she's had experiences of being criticized,
Right.
ignored, invalidated,
Right.
then to have the experience of somebody hearing her out,
Right.
taking her seriously,
Right.
trying to meet her halfway,
Right.
that could be an important experience.
Right.
And it might be, even if we never get anywhere with this task,
Right.
trying to get there could do something.
Right. And I think that's very important to understand that potential exists with this pathway as well.
Okay, so now we'll go to our last video demonstration.
Okay. Should we go straight to the next clip?
Yeah. Just to remind, this is the renegotiation pathway, and now we're going to do an illustration that gives you some sense of how we think about the expressive pathway, and then I'll say a little bit more at the back end of that. So I wanted to start this session by getting a sense of how the last session, which was our first session together, how that was for you, and what was your experience of it, and what thoughts you had after it.
Yeah, it was okay. I think it was probably good that I came.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I liked every question you asked me, and I don't really like to talk about myself that much. But I think it was okay, and hopefully, it gets better.
Okay. Well, so can we focus on the parts that you weren't so okay with? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, you asked me, questions about myself and what I thought what my concerns were, and a lot of that is, what other people might think of me and things that I do. And I think that part made me a little uncomfortable, just thinking about that. And sharing that I feel that way with you. Like I just didn't, I mean, maybe then you're gonna think, there's something wrong with me for thinking that, like I should just.
Well, say a little bit more about that, because I know you allude to other people, but you're also suggesting something about me and our process together and how I might react.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think you want to help me. I just don't know if you maybe understand like everything from that I'm going through from like my world.
Right.
So I think that makes it hard for me.
I get that. It makes sense. And I think, look, therapy's hard, and I'm still a stranger to you. So I think it's understandable to have some misgivings about opening yourself up. But I still want to hear more about the misgivings, because I still think it's important, if you can understand that.
Okay. I think I maybe want you to like me, and I want other people to like me. And if I tell you something, I want to know that you're not gonna look at me like there's something wrong with me. So I think, like I just want to know that, I can share something with you, and that you're like, oh yeah, I get that, I understand that. And I think that that's really where my concern and my fear came from last week.
Yeah. What's going on for you now?
No, it's all right. I mean, it was an okay week. It's an okay week, and yeah, I mean, it's just hard sometimes when you're just trying to kind of be your own person, and just making sure that you fit in all the different places that, like at work, I want to make sure that I fit in and people aren't looking at me strangely. Yeah.
I'm a little torn now, because I could see asking you more about that, fitting in the outside world. But I still have this curiosity about your concerns about working with me, fitting in with me. I know you mentioned the world, something about understanding your world, so I'm willing to go either path, but I just want to share where I'm at with that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you're a person like I am, but maybe our experiences are a little different, and I just want to know that you have a way of understanding the things that I'm going through, because there might be a little different from the things that you go through, because we're just, I think our worlds are a little bit different. So maybe some of the things that happen to me might not happen to somebody like you.
Okay. I hear you, but can you say even more about the difference? Like, what do you, I'm imagining things, but I just want to I also don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want to kind of, in a sense, draw you out, because I feel like you're being careful also.
Well, I mean, you're a guy, you know that.
Yeah,
so there's some things that obviously women go through, and we're supposed to look a certain way and act a certain way, and you don't have to worry about that. But also, I think that your background, is different, and mine is, I'm a minority, and I feel like I'm a minority and a woman, and you're not. And I don't know if I share with you, if you're like, oh, that maybe that just happens to those people.
Okay. So as a white male, there's some concern that I just won't understand or get you. Is that
I
fair?
mean, it's fair, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, our shoes are different. Like, I think that's just different. It's just normal. I guess normal, I don't know. I don't know if it's normal.
Well, so how does it feel actually defining that and saying that?
Well, we know now, right? Like you, maybe when I talk to you about something, you can, I don't know if you can imagine being in like where I sit, right? Like, I don't know if you're like, okay, well, now let me think about it from her perspective. Maybe it's different over here, but
Right,
where
right,
she is.
right,
So
right.
maybe now that we have talked about that, you can make sure that you think about that when we're talking.
Okay,
So you don't
okay.
forget that.
Okay. So it makes you feel, just that clarity makes you feel a little more hopeful, but I still get that. And it makes sense to me that you'd still be
Yeah.
wary about it too.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Chris, I'm really curious about your experience in this demonstration.
Well, I mean, the first thing I was very much aware of was her wariness. I could see it, I could feel it, and so one of the big challenges was trying to navigate the way she would obscure things. So I was trying to be very careful in trying to draw her out, trying to court a clearer expression of her concerns, trying to really court agency on her part. The one thing that I thought that was interesting and I remember as it was happening, I was like, oh, this is interesting that I'm doing it this way. But there was a moment where she alluded to difficulty in other relationships. She kind of moved away a little bit from our relationship. And I decided to just give her, well, I framed the movement and basically gave her, in a sense, the option of like continuing with that or returning to talking about her concerns about our relationship. I think I would normally have framed the movement away and say, okay, I hear you talking about troubles in other relationships, but can we for now just focus on what's going on between us? But I chose not to do that. It wasn't so deliberate. It was more of an intuitive thing. And I think it's connected to the sort of sense of really wanting to promote her sense of agency. And then the other thing that was really salient to me was the whole issue of defining differences. And I thought, in a sense, what we accomplished was a beginning. I felt like there's so many more differences yet to be defined, not just with regard to how I saw her, but also how she saw me. In some sense, she, at this point, sees me as a white male. So I'm glad we were able to talk about that and define that, but that's still also a bit objectifying too. So I felt like there's still much more differentiation that needs to be worked on. And so we were quite a distance from mutual recognition.
Right.
But we took a step. We took a step. So those are kind of the things that stood out for me.
And it was a really important step to take. And I'm reminded of one of my students talks about when people flatten other people and how important it is that you've got to create a lot of space to do enough dialogue that you're not doing that to the other person or
Right.
having that done to
Right.
you.
Right.
And I really also appreciated the way you were trying to invite a collaborative inquiry. So even at the very beginning, it was a very, can we focus on this? Like, it was always framed in a way, it was sort of leading up to the moment when you really explicitly said, do you want to do this or do you want to do that?
Right.
It's sort of that style, that approach, I thought was true throughout. And that seemed particularly important here, that you're not sort of imposing something.
Yeah, and I think on reflection, and again, it wasn't so deliberate, but I think promoting her, empowering her, promoting her agency, making sure she was in play with me in sort of deciding on where we were going to go. I mean, I know that that's a principle should be applied across the board pretty much, but I felt like it was especially important here. Yeah.
And speaking of principles that should be true all the time, you were also very validating of her experience, her concerns. That's good alliance building.
Right.
And really tracking her responses to what you were saying. And like, for example, that one moment when she sort of withdrew just for a moment and kind of went silent, and you checked in, what's going on for you right now.
Right.
Those are really important things for us to be doing all the time.
Right. True. It was tricky, but it was a step forward.
It was a step forward. It was a step.
And I think it's still important. I think these little steps have like huge implications. So I do believe that.
I agree. Okay, so now we'll go to our next video demonstration.
Okay, so let me say a little bit more about the work we've done on modeling the expressive pathway. And so our early research, if you're familiar with it, really concentrated on this, involved intensive application of mixed methods, resulting in validation of a stage process model that defined the expressive pathway. Historically, we prioritized this, we've privileged it, we've in some sense considered it the elegant solution. But more recently, I think we've come to appreciate the therapeutic potential of the renegotiation pathway, and we're actually doing more research on that as we present. But here I want to present the model that we researched back in the 90s, and it includes 4 stages, each stage being interactive, involving both patient and therapist behaviors. And the critical change principle in this is metacommunication, which I'm going to define further shortly. But it begins with addressing the rupture, and here that involves the therapist inviting the patient, recognizing a withdrawal or confrontation, inviting the patient to collaboratively explore the experience. It leads to exploring negative feelings. It can lead to the patient becoming uncomfortable about such an exploration and engaging in an avoidance maneuver. But ultimately, the work in that exploration leads to recognizing an underlying need of agency or communion, and the therapist validating that experience. Next slide. The expressive trajectories that we've defined with regard to each rupture look like this. So with withdrawal, what we typically expect is a movement towards expressing negative sentiments, but initially doing it in sort of a mixed or ambivalent way. And you can sort of see that in the last video demonstration. So this movement from withdrawal to mixed expression to a more clear assertion by the patient. The trajectory for confrontation typically involves moving from the confrontative marker to an expression of disappointment or hurt by the patient towards contacting an underlying vulnerability that kind of marks a sort of need for nurturance or connection with the other. So these are the typical pathways that we see within the expressive pathway when you're working towards resolution. And in a sense, what we're trying to develop here is we're trying to sensitize therapists to how things might progress. So help develop an internal representation. So let me say a little bit more now about metacommunication. So by metacommunication, what we're talking about is the principle of attempting to step outside a patient-therapist interaction by treating it as the focus of collaborative inquiry. That is communication about the communication process. It's a notion that Don Kiesler brought to the psychotherapy literature from the communications literature. By metacommunication, we're talking about an emphasis on the details and fluidity of here and now experience, on self-reflection and self-expression, including therapist disclosure, on shared contribution, and on awareness over change. We consider it a form of mindfulness and interaction, an attempt to bring immediate awareness to bear on the interactive process as it unfolds. It is a technical strategy that, one, brings intersubjective negotiation into relief, two, promotes emotion regulation. Putting words to unformulated experience is very regulated for both patient and therapist. There's a way in which we regulate ourselves, but also we can be regulating for the other. Three, makes mutual recognition more possible. And again, by that, we're talking about recognizing our respective subjectivities. And four, helps resolve the dialectics that I highlighted earlier. Next slide. Now I want to be a little more concrete by what we mean by metacommunication. And one way to understand it is as it involves three potential focuses. One focus is on patient experience, and this can involve questions of what are you feeling right now, or you seem anxious to me, you seem wary to me. These are sort of common interventions you might see, especially from the humanistic tradition. The other focus is on the interpersonal field, as expressed by questions like what's going on here between us, or observations like it seems like we're in some kind of dance or some kind of chess match. And of course, this is characteristic of the interpersonal tradition. And then the final focus would be on the therapist's experience. And here, this, as I alluded to, can involve affective disclosures, like I'm aware of feeling anxious or defensive right now. But it can also include inviting the patient to wonder about the therapist's subjectivity, with questions like, do you have any thoughts about what might be going on for me right now? The important thing to bear in mind in this respect, though, is that when you ask a question like that, you should be really open to discovering something new about your own experience or own behavior that you weren't so aware of. This isn't really an exercise in identifying a patient's projections. I'm going to say a little bit about our alliance-focused training protocol that we've developed over the years. Includes the following objectives and strategies. We focus on developing such explicit skills, no surprise, rupture recognition, helping trainees become more aware of interpersonal and intrapersonal markers, developing rupture repair skills, immediate and expressive, with a concentration on metacommunication. We focus on such implicit skills as developing mental representations, and this alludes to what I was trying to demonstrate, being familiar with potential repair pathways, developing interpersonal sensitivity, so really heightening the trainees' awareness of intersubjective process, and emotion regulation, and sort of developing therapist skills to make effective use of their negative states, whether they be anxiety or frustration, or even despair. And Catherine earlier presented a number of possibilities. And finally, I wanted to sort of comment on an essential part of our training, which is the use of experiential exercises. And in this regard, what I mean is we incorporate mindfulness meditation to help develop therapists' abilities to optimally observe their, not only the process with the patient, but their internal experience. We also employ awareness experiments, 2 chair exercises, to develop therapists' emotional involvement, their orientation to their internal world. So let me say a little bit more about what our research has yielded. And essentially what we've been able to demonstrate that AFT has resulted in less dropout, less premature termination. It has actually increased positive interpersonal process and decreased negative interpersonal process. And in terms of the therapist experience, what we've demonstrated that as a byproduct of the AFT, therapists have become much more aware of their emotional experience with their patients in a much more differentiated way. And with that, I'm going to let Catherine close with some lessons learned from our work.
So this first part won't be any surprise based on what we've already talked about. We think it's important to be attentive to ruptures, especially withdrawal, because those can be more subtle, less obvious, more easy to miss. To be open to inviting the patient to explore negative experiences or feelings with you, and you can use metacommunication as a tool for doing that. And being open to your own contribution to what's happening in the rupture process, sharing responsibility for what's happening. Some basic attitudes that we think are a helpful place for a therapist to be operating from when trying to negotiate a rupture is maintaining humility, cultivating self-compassion, so being able to own your part of what's going on, but in a compassionate way. Courting curiosity, that curiosity can help you stay connected to the patient even in a difficult moment. Being patient, because it can take a while and ruptures may not be immediately repaired. It may take going through a process multiple times. And balancing with positivity, so keeping in mind that the research suggests that repairing a rupture contributes to good outcomes. So a rupture is not necessarily a bad thing per se. If we can work on it, if we can repair it, it can prove to be an opportunity. Some strategies that we suggest can be helpful for therapists to use would be to engage in mindfulness exercises, maybe even before a difficult session, to kind of help you be oriented towards attending to your experience in the process. You can track your own emotions after sessions and see if there are patterns in what feelings come up for you in certain clinical moments. If you're able to videotape your sessions, reviewing your own videos is incredibly helpful. Critical inquiry, so sort of being willing to challenge your own assumptions and hypotheses and think critically about what might be going on with your cases. And practicing under pressure. So this is something we do in our supervision with role plays that helps kind of simulate some of what's happening in a moment of rupture. And consulting with other people. So if you can get supervision or peer consultation, this can be really helpful in helping you navigate ruptures. And we just wanted to nod to the fact that many of us are now doing therapy online, which may not have been how we were operating before the pandemic. And this can obviously affect our interactions with our patients. We may find that we have to attend more to what is available to us over the screen. We can't see their foot tapping. We may have to attend more to subtle facial expressions and vocal expressions. We may feel closer or we may feel more distant. There can be implications for safety and power. Some patients are going to feel safer doing therapy from home. Some patients are going to feel more vulnerable trying to talk about the difficulties they face with the people they live with from the place where they live with them. And that can affect the therapist too. And this is a situation where we're all in a vulnerable state together, which is both challenging, but also a shared experience that can be something we can explore together.
Okay, so we evidently picked up the pace the last 10 minutes, but here are some references that you can review at your leisure. We will be making these slides available so you can be able to tap into these. Catherine, the last slide. And here's our website, which will have more materials. We also are on ResearchGate, so there are a lot of articles that we have on ResearchGate regarding theory, practice, and research. So with that, we will stop. Maybe there'll be a little time for a few questions.
Yeah, and Chris, that one of the questions was about the slides. I thought that they would only be in the video, but are you also going to make the slides available as a file?
Yeah, I'll convert to PDF and send it to you, Tracy. So you
okay, great. So we will
available.
make that available on the website. Somebody asked that earlier and I said, no, I was wrong.
No, we're good with those things.
We have a bunch of questions. So Pedro, who I think is joining us from Portugal, if I'm not mistaken, has a question about whether patient characteristics or preferences contribute to the shaping of the alliance and the negotiation of the alliance. Is there research or clinical experience about that?
I mean, it's actually patient characteristics, dispositions, histories, as well as therapist characteristics, disposition history, and that's the process, and it's a process towards, those differences are at the heart of rupture, and resolution is when you come to a more differentiated understanding of all those things. So that's yeah, so that's the grist for the messiness, the collisions that do occur in the course of human interactions, and then of course in the therapeutic interaction, and the work towards making those things more clear is the challenge and the hope for rupture repair.
Great, thanks. And then another question of, do you think therapeutic orientation is relevant to how you conceptualize and develop alliance and rupture repair?
Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay. Yes and no. So, I mean, I think it's important. This is my own bias. I have a sort of a common factors bias, so I don't want to lose sight of how, we probably share more than what divides us. But that being said, it's definitely true that I think that certain approaches to therapy are likely to pull for or be more like if the patient's going to chafe against something, they're going to chafe against structure in a structured therapy. They're going to chafe against lack of structure in a less structured therapy. And I also think how therapists sort of regard things can be shaped by their orientation. So for example, I have students coding therapy sessions, and my more psychodynamic students could see a patient, trying to explore something. They might go longer before they say that patient is withdrawing. And a CBT student who's kind of more used to kind of answer the question, get to the next thing, might be quicker to say that patient's withdrawing. Who's right really could depend. I mean, sometimes, one could be saying it too soon and one saying it too late. But that, I think that lens can affect kind of how they see it and where it strikes them.
That's a great example of how it, you know, it's in the eye of the beholder to some degree. Let's see, we have another question about, Barbara Ingram asks, do the concepts of transference and countertransference have any place in your model?
I mean, there's certainly common ground. I think you know, we don't necessarily list them as informative because, well, first they come from a different psychology, and that kind of orients towards the patient. So the patient transfers and the the therapist counter transfers. That's the bent of it, and even there are analysts who'll cut out the counter transference completely and just talk about patient and therapist transferences. But even that doesn't do service to the complexity of each individual's experience in the interaction. So when you say transference, then there's this bent, like a lot's coming from one person and being projected onto the other, but it doesn't cover, I mean, those things happen, but then there's this interaction with what the other person's experience is and the other person's history. So, and I know, you know, I'm probably, I know I'm oversimplifying, not probably. I know there are sophisticated perspectives from the analytic tradition that try to like address what I'm saying, but I just think in the end we decided that it's not useful in a way, and it gets in the way. I mean, you see that in the analytic literature, that there's certain people that just give up on the orthodox language and concepts and come up with their own idiom, because you know, and in fact, when you talk about countertransference, there are all these different definitions of it, right? And the same thing with like projective identification, all these different definitions. So then, like, what do you actually mean? And I think in the end, we just felt more comfortable landing on an intersubjective platform.
Can I give an even, can I even oversimplify even more? So this reminds me of something that came out of the special issue we just did for a Journal of Clinical in Session. And we noticed that therapists of different orientations all submitted examples of rupture. And the most common repair strategy they all used was linking the rupture to something in the patient's other relationships, which is kind of a transference interpretation, sort of.
Right.
Or it's like linking to, you know, core schemas and CBT, or, you know, like the different traditions have their ways of describing that. And in all of them, we saw that it has a potential value in helping kind of explain like why this rupture thing is important. It's connected, it kind of helps you generalize from that experience, but there's always the risk that that'll be an avoidance maneuver, that like talking about us right now is getting us both so uncomfortable. Let's now talk about your mom, or, you know, something that feels safer.
And we were always worried about the defensive potential of that kind of move. And there's actually research from Bill Piper's group back in the 90s that kind of suggested that in the face of pressure or rupture, or whatever you call it, dynamic therapists would commonly go to a transference interpretation, and in the end, it's experienced by the patient as blaming and defensive on the therapist side. I mean, cognitive therapists do the same thing too. They could go after the cognitive distortions of the patient, and Louis Castengay group actually illustrated that as well. So under pressure, you go to your toolbox and you can, you know, just lay it on thicker in terms of whatever your tools are.
To do your own experiential avoidance.
Yeah.
We just have a minute left. I'm going to ask you a quick yes or no question. Can there be an alliance rupture if the alliance hasn't formed yet? Like it's the first session.
Yes. This is my answer.
Good job following directions, Catherine.
Yes. You know, it's funny, I lost the direction. I was about to go on. Yes, thank you, Catherine.
Okay. I'm going to put a link in the chat for everybody of our upcoming webinar. And Shigeru, you want to say anything at the end here?
Oh, just I just want to thank Catherine and Chris for a great. I always was a big fan of the rupture, literature, and every time I, get the new things, I get more. I learn more from you guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from the research and a lot of clinical stuff. And I just want to thank also Tracy for organizing the practical aspect of it as always, and also moderating this session so well. And we couldn't have done this without you, so thank you.
No problem.
And the last announcement being that another webinar in May, and also the SEPI is going to have an online conference in June, so please look forward to that. We will have more announcement.
And I will put a link to the conference registration in the chat also. It's a wonderful, wonderful conference. The program is amazing and it's very accessible, very affordable. Please join us.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of live events connecting all over the world.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe.